So, hi everyone, welcome to the latest Sasensei SID event. We're really thrilled to have Zeke here presenting with us on a really important topic, which is Git and SAS. So, take it away, Zeke.
Awesome, thanks. I think you need to enable me as a presenter so I can start sharing my screen,
Yes.
just in case.
Okay, that's done.
All right. So what I wanted to talk about, and there's actually a lot of code and I think minimal SAS here. I'm sorry, well, minimal of the Git part in terms of the actual execution, but more of the idea of what we're going to run with code. When we run with Git and we trap our code with Git, which is what I like to call it, we end up having a situation where our code has started to be managed, where we can execute the code that we have in a branch. And when I start speaking in those terms, it feels like often someone who's new to Git doesn't understand the benefit of having a branch or having the ability to actually uh, leverage what we do with branches. So Git tends to be something that is still new to people that I talk to. And what I'm usually afraid of is that they'll end up having an idea of what a branch is that isn't optimal to what we can do with branches with SAS. So let me recap what I just said, because I know it's probably early or late in the evening for some people. With our ability to actually branch with Git, we have the ability to toggle between different iterations or different versions of the code that we have. And that to me has become kind of a powerful way to manage the code that I'm working on, because oftentimes there are minor variations that I'd like to test or evaluate. And so in the past, I used to be the developer who would have a .sas that maybe had a backslash in one direction or a path of a specific type in one direction, or some kind of configuration, and I needed to change everything in order to go do something else. So I would have a different percent let value to make my life easier, because I'm supposedly trying to do things smarter with SAS. And that would make my life easier, but suddenly I had another .sas, which was just a copy of something else. So although part of what I've just done seems like, okay, I've made my maintenance of my code easier by applying a backslash, and that backslash or forward slash helps me simplify my naming of something. That in this example that I'm showing here is useful if I'm trying to condense or build examples of a path name, and instead of having these actually show up in what I call a static way or a hard-coded way, I would just improve that by doing something like this. And so now my code ends up having the ability to toggle between this direction of the slash or this direction of a slash. And my job now is to maintain the distinction that I never want to hard code the value of a slash again in any of the percent lets that I may have further down in my code, like here. So I would be able to build my path names in a dynamic way if I'm toggling between those two versions. The key is that I still have the need to actually maintain this slash in code somewhere, right? Somewhere this slash has to be kept in a static state. And so let me backtrack a little bit. In its original form of the code, this code would have to be kept as the demo template.sas. But if I toggle this slash to something else and I want to maintain my accuracy in Git, I want to maintain my accuracy of the code. I still have to save it. So I have to decide, do I want to save it as va demo templates .slash or va demo template backslash or forward slash .sas, something of that nature. So what I've become accustomed to do is that anything that becomes a toggle, anything that is related to things that switch based on things like my operational iOS or my operational Windows machine become percentlets that I keep in a setup or config like macro parm set of code. And that way, when I toggle between branches, and I'll show you that in a second, when I toggle between branches, that is one distinction that I make. I have a branch for my iOS or I have a branch for my Windows configuration. And then in my situation, I run on a government system for some clients called the VRDC, and that is a Unix-based system. And that system actually has not just the slash directional topic to consider, but it has a more complex naming convention in terms of the path that we are assigned as users. So we have a much more sophisticated uh, reason to branch, and it has to do with we would have a branch for our own individual machines. So Zeke would have a branch for his Windows machines. Zeke would have a branch for his Apple machines or his iOS machines. But Alan might have a branch for his Unix Ubuntu path naming conventions. And those branches allow us to decouple those parameters, these various percentlets and the global macro variables from the rest of our code, which would need to run in order for us to actually accomplish getting the right live name assignments or getting the right configuration of the overall environment that we're going to be working in. So that in and of itself to me is a justification, a reason to explore using that branch methodology, that we can toggle between those with a branch. So I want to subsequently, I'm going to run this code right now so that we can get something moving and showing. Should work. So this code is now run on my Windows machine, and I have the assignment of that slash work for me, and I can actually go and see the librefs that were just assigned and done for me. So this environment for me on my machine is now done. I can now begin to work on my code the way I need to. And I know that if I'm referencing an RIF lib or some other lib name, it'll be consistent. And if I work on an Apple machine or if I work on a Unix machine and I switch this to a different directional for the slash, I then have the ability to, when I run this on my Unix machine, if I adjust that name, and I don't have a Unix machine to show, but if I had made that adjustment, then that when I run this, I will end up with the same lib name configuration and the same kind of environmental configuration that I sought, even if the paths or the folder or subsequent underlying alias connection to that lib name are all contorted by the subsequent operating system. But the management of that, the the place that I would keep track of the differences can be done via the branching. Okay. So the reason why to me that this is even more important is because what we've just done is we've only discussed the differences in the actual the differences of why we would use branches with our percentlets to basically toggle between the differences. And so this is very macro centric, right? This is very SAS centric. We've seen this philosophy. We're familiar with why we would do this. And it seems like novel and trivial. But to me, the other reason why I would do this, and I'm sorry, I got to find the file to be able to switch to it because I just realized I closed the window a second ago. The reason why it's important to make these types of changes, and I'll share some code here that I have that was given to me by a client. So I'm going to show you kind of the before and the after so we can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So a client shared with me some code that they were exploring and trying out, and they don't have kind of the affinity. They're not in tune with using percent-lets or kind of exploring the macro variable features of things. So things are very static in nature, and I don't even go with any client or peer to criticize their code style. So there's always different preferences that people have. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of what Alan has with SAS.js, because I'm really liking it. But in this scenario, we have what I call code that's really static, code that really sits heavy with things that have been typed and set hard in stone. And when I show you what I believe a after should look like, it will seem very verbose, but hopefully it has the right let me change a few things here because I noticed that there's some things I don't want to show just yet. So what I'm doing now with the code is in the same vein of having my percent-lets become a preface or the top part of my code that allow me. So here what I've done is I've created a percent-let to get to my desired path of where my code is. And I believe we're all familiar with that. But what I've done further is I've decoupled the actual code itself from having any kind of static name to it. So you'll see ampersand out ds cube, you'll see ampersand source data, you'll see things become much more decoupled from the static nature that it was, where the code is actually finished and done, where the code has actually been prepped and finished. And where I start to transition into code that is exploratory, I end up leaving things much more static until I decide that they're finished and that they're ready to go. So in the same vein, this code here, all of these lines of code that are basically done would be kept in their own .sas. We would decouple it and it would go into a finished branch versus an exploratory branch versus some other methodology of naming that we would use to create a distinction between what is a finished kind of prepped code versus maybe the client or our peers looking and evaluating something in an ad hoc way. And so we could envision a branch for ad hoc work versus a branch for finished and prepped work or finished and deliverable work. And so that to me is another reason or another justification of using branches to toggle between those. So I'll at least be fair to kind of show what we're doing here. In this code, the need was to create these variables that clean up our fields and that clean up the properties in our fields, that assign labels and titles. And in this case, this code is actually doing some crosswalking to create some new fields and to do some new field preparation. I basically wrap those into macros so that things would be kind of kept in their own section. So these are custom vars we want to read from a raw state into a better, cleaner state. These are number fields we want to prepare and do something specific with. So what I do in this type of code is I'll do all those field preps. I'll wrap them into macros that are specific to the use case that they are, and what they happen to be, so that they're in sections, almost like a chapter of a book that I can go back and manage. And so in this section, we're doing the U-type description preparation. And so everything here is related to that. And here we're doing the state preparation. And in this type of data, we're dealing with states from all across the Western Hemisphere. So Mexico, Canada, the United States. And so I'm doing field prep in a way so that the client can see this methodology, understand it before we take it from this iteration and improve it, because I'm not exactly a fan of this if and in type of scenario. But I need to coax the client along, and I don't want to radically change from what they have. And so then I have a country prep macro and other field prep macros, things that don't fit into buckets. And then in the way that I like to code, I like to code a list of fields that are IDs that I know I'll need. So that way I'll never have to remember all of them. I just remember that I need the vars that are IDs and vars that I want to ignore and never keep beyond my import. Vars that are dates, vars that are geos. So I like to do these little shortcuts so I don't have to remember every single field in every single place. And every time I do an import, I only keep the vars that I keep, and that simplifies my life. And here, what I do is I end up applying the macros that prep and clean my data. And so when I build out or clean out code for people, you'll see those kind of chapters of things, of macros. And then if I have a different scenario, I can apply the same macros to those other data steps that need the same preparation, but I might just need to do the state prep, or I might just need to do the country prep. And we all know how the macros just finished working. And so that's how I end up streamlining code. So I kind of want to pause there and maybe take a sampling of where people are at, and kind of take a time check as well of the justification for why we would use branches in that capacity to, again, toggle between the path name or the iOS or the Windows 10 or the Unix naming of things, and also the justification of, why we would benefit with that for our percent lets. Because if we don't have the percent lets set correctly, like in this scenario, we can never get to a scenario where we can quickly toggle for those things. So to me, it's a combination of the elements, right? That we use the right macro variable style and convention, but that we keep it in a place where we're changing the most minimal things. Like in this scenario, I'm using, instead of hard coding the way this has been done, right? I don't use that. I use my ampersand out ds cube to allow me to always only need to change things here. The rest of it just works. The rest of it just kind of cascades through. So so I want to pause there and maybe see how or what people think about this. Let me see if I can find my stop sharing. There we are. Are there any questions?
Hi, Zeke, this is Alan. I've got one question. What would be the advantages of using a branch over just setting those forward backslashes with like a short macro with some conditional logic?
So to me, the advantage is, if you're running on a remote machine, or let's say you're running on a virtual machine that's managed by a team, by having the branches, we can track the changes, right? If somebody left the operational settings to run, let's say for a quarterly process, or to run for a annual process, what happens in running for an annual process is we might have the percent let values configured for the annual mechanization of what we're doing. But if our peers or our colleagues need to use the same code on that virtual machine, but now run it for a quarterly or for a monthly process or even a weekly process, there are minimal changes they need to make because we've helped them along. We've put the right percent let values in the right place to help them along. But now the problem is, instead of them toggling between branches and going to a safe setting, right, like a quarterly branch, an annual branch, or a weekly branch, we've now left it up to their caffeinated state of the morning to remember what toggles to switch around. Now, in the scenarios that I've given, we're just dealing with a slash, right? Forward slash or backslash. It seems pretty simple. So it's a pretty simple kind of state to, remember, either forward or backwards. But what if we're dealing with a complex configuration of percent lets? What if we're dealing with multiple lines of percent lets that are contingent on the values of the others? That suddenly becomes a place where it's now more justified to have branches for those settings to be pre-configured and preset, where now we just toggle between the branches. And because we followed a methodology of conforming our percent-lets into a nice cascading style. I like to use the word cascading style percent-lets because, in web terms or in HTML and CSS terms, there's this thing called CSS or cascading style sheets. If you look at our macros, they're really cascading, right? You set them up at the top, and then if you embed a macro inside a percent-let inside of another percent-let, they kind of cascade into each other. And so when I think of it in those terms, the reason why percent-lets or macro variables are so exciting is because you can cascade them into all sorts of values together, right, or separately. But I think that's also one of the hard parts is that if you don't remember how that cascading style ends up actually being deployed when the code compiles and works, you end up being kind of contorted into the wrong folder, the wrong path, or the wrong settings, or the wrong configuration. And I think that's the challenge, is that we're trying to reduce that variability or the unanticipated variability. So to me, it's much more safer, much more powerful to have branches configured with our percent-lets pre-configured in a safe state, ready for somebody to run.
Hey Zeke, this is Quentin. Can you are you gonna be able to show sort of the Git side where you've got these branches defined and how you pull from? So basically, if I'm programming one day on a weekly report, I need to make sure I pull or check out from the weekly report, check out the config.sas or whatever you're calling them, this program with the lets from the weekly report branch. And the next week, if I'm running a monthly report, I need to make sure I check out that code or pull it from the monthly report branch. And those
Sure.
branches. And
Sure. You know what?
Yeah.
Yep, I can actually do that. Let me go ahead and find one that's in a nice state for it. And I apologize. I should have thought about that's, the best questions are always the ones that I never prepare for. So let me go ahead, and I'm breaking some rules here, but I'm going to go ahead and lock this code down real quick for everybody. Just to kind of highlight this, and I think that's a good. All right, so let me double check something, and I'll share my screen again here in a second. I apologize. All right, so do I have this showing up?
I'll just take this moment while Zeke's doing his configuration to remind everyone that at the end of this session, we'll be running a virtual island networking event, and the link will be shared in the chat. And I do hope that all of you will be able to come along. It'll be an opportunity to meet each other in a new and interesting way.
All right, so I have created a new repository here, and I'm just going to put in some basic code. I know I'm getting there with I'm getting there with the sharing screen. Just bear with me. I want to make sure I copy the right code over to kind of highlight this. So I am there. All right. So where's my? There we go. Okay. Sharing screen. Screen number 2. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I don't have any code in here, so I'm going to go ahead and put some code in. I've created kind of a new repository. So I'm going to be breaking some rules here just to get this moving along. And I'm going to copy this over and make sure that I have something to kind of highlight. And so file. Save as, pardon me. Okay, so I have some code there that I'm going to add to my repository. And this is just to move things along. So I'm going to publish that. I just added it to a repository that I just started. So it's the base code that everybody wants to work on and that everybody agrees is okay. I'm going to create a new branch because I want something that will actually run on, let's say, iOS, or let's call this the ZT, the Unix version. So by creating that branch, I'll now come into the code and I will change it to be the Unix version, and it might have a different path. So that's the initial code, the code that everybody agrees is the starting point and is the one that will be the first one to initiate this process, to begin the repository and to start tracking the differences and the changes. And so I'm going to go ahead and commit that. And so now I have two different branches that I can toggle between to go and actually use the Unix version or the version for Windows. So just having those two branches, I can start to toggle between those two differences. And so I want to show the distinction. So let me show what I'm doing here much more slowly. By toggling between just those two branches, between main and Unix, my code actually changes for those two variations, for those two iterations that I have. So Windows or the operating system will switch between those because Git is managing those two changes for us. So again, I'm going to toggle to my main branch, and I don't know if the file name or the file date specificity will change because they were done so close together, but let's see. So I'm going to toggle to the main branch. I'm on the main branch now. If I go to open or show in Explorer, I'm going to close that other window. I now see that code 732. I'm going to open it and see what's in there. And that's the original one with the D and that version of the slash. But I realize that's not the code I want to use. I want to use the one for Unix. So I'm going to toggle to my Unix branch. I haven't changed the code. I haven't done anything. It's already been stored. And I think you can see there's a difference of 1 minute. The system has already adjusted to whatever Git has toggled for me. So now as I open up this code, it's that other version, right? It's the other iteration of the code. And so let's go ahead and do it even further down the line here. Let me find my other finished version, and I want to show what I can do with this. If I actually create yet another branch off of the main branch, I'm going to call it my updated one. And then if I find, where is that one that I want? Here it is. And I'm going to add it to my, I'm going to take that other example that I had and so what I've just done is I've taken the example that I had with a lot of the percent lets and I've overlaid it, right? The example where I've made those kind of changes. I don't want to say improvements because again, it's a preference of style. So my version of it, where I've made my updates, I'm tracking it there. So this is Zeke's updated version. And I'm just pushing it out it's all private and secured, but I'm going to go ahead and open that to show everybody what's there. So this is the version that has all those percent lets, or like my preference of the percent lets to actually accomplish this. So what would happen if I toggle to the main branch? Well, the main branch, I've just toggled to it. I'm going to go over here. The main branch is that original version. It's the one that we know runs on Windows. So I'm going to switch again to the Unix version. And now the Unix version is the one that has the path and the slashes conformed to run on Unix. But I'm going to leave this actually, I just thought of something. I'm going to leave TextPad open because I'm going to switch to another branch, and TextPad will actually warn us if it does the right. See, what TextPad basically knows is the actual file name has switched behind it, and so TextPad is saying, hey, this file's been updated, or do you want to reload it? And if we say yes, you'll actually see the changes here. This is where it switches right to whatever it's catching up to the changes of the branch. So in this example, we could have any number of branches for any number of states that the code is meant to be running on or working on, or kind of again, a monthly state, a Unix state, a Unix monthly state, or something like that, where we've reduced the number of changes that we impose upon our peers that need to run the code for us or for the team.
Quentin, does that answer your question?
Yep, I was just trying to unmute. Thanks. Yeah, that was helpful to see it in action.
Great, thanks, Zeke. We're gonna have to call it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd like to say, big thanks to Zeke for presenting. I'm gonna stop the video. 1 second.